This is The Guide Gals, a modern, wedding-focused podcast by the experts at Here Comes the Guide. I'm Chelsea, a designer and inspired creative who's probably racked up over 10,000 hours on Pinterest and the friend who's going to shoot it to you straight.
And I'm Caroline, a social media manager who's obsessed with dogs as ring bearers and will inevitably cry over your wedding video. We've seen it from all sides. We've been brides, planners, bridesmaids, and have worked with standout brands throughout the industry.
Think of us as an extension of your wedding party and hang out with us as we share the ins, outs, ups, and downs of the road to I Do.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Guide Gals podcast. We are super excited to be back with another episode today, and we have another guest. So today's guest, we're going to talk all about wedding photography, some tips and advice, and this is our dear friend and coworker, Jenny, and I just cannot wait for you guys to hear from her and all of the amazing tips, tricks, advice, and just her amazing personality. So Jenny, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I am so excited and so honored that you guys asked me to do this. So
Yay.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we couldn't be more excited. Will you just tell us a little bit just about yourself briefly?
Yeah, I'm a photographer. I've been shooting, for a long time. Probably got started in 2008 and lived in Los Angeles, shot a lot of my daughters growing up and documenting their lives, and then also shot a lot of weddings down in Los Angeles, and then moved away from LA during COVID, and in that time joined working with Here Comes the Guide, and then also just recently have kind of stepped away from wedding photography, but I still love everything about it and spreading knowledge about it because it's a beast. So
Yes, there's a lot that goes into wedding photography for sure, and we're really happy to have you here to talk about it. Caroline and I bring up photography and videography, any of the media that goes into weddings all the time because we're pretty obsessed with it. So we're so happy that you're here. And if you guys have looked at our website or our social media at all and you've seen the brand photos that we have for the Guide Gals, all those photos were taken by Jenny. So we love them. She's super talented, as you can see.
Well, now that we've kind of established some of who we are, what Jenny's going to talk about, I have to stop us there because, as always, we're going to chat about our beverage of the day. So, Jenny, what do you have?
well, if it's a beverage of the day and I were to pick one, it's not in front of me right now, but I have been recently obsessed with the Olipop watermelon lime.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you guys tried it?
I just had it the other day.
Okay. I am obsessed and I can't find it everywhere. I've only found it at Target as of right now. I could probably live off of them right now. They're so good.
Yeah.
That's my drink.
Oh my gosh, it's the perfect summer beverage. It's just light and fresh and yeah.
Nope. Well, now I'm craving it, but all I have in front of me is water, but that's okay. So I'll get one later.
Perfect. Chelsea, what about you?
I am just drinking water right now. There are some electrolytes in there, so that kind of spices things up, but I'm getting hydrated this afternoon.
Love it. What flavor?
It's Element. It's like I think it's citrus. It's the green one, which is my least favorite, but it's all I have left. So
No, citrus is my favorite.
I like orange.
Ooh. Oh, okay. That's fair. Speaking of citrus for me, I have a lemon lime twist Zevia. My neighbor brought it over for me to try. It's sweetened with stevia. It's fine. It was a 30-cent can that they brought over, so I said, sure, why not? Is it my lemon lime Olipop? No. Is it my citrus Element? No. But it works. And if I didn't want to drink that right now, I do have 3 other options around me. We don't need to talk about my beverage obsession or maybe addiction. But just so you know, there are other options surrounding me as well. Now we're going to jump into the nitty-gritty of this episode. And I think Chelsea and I, like Chelsea said, are just obsessed with photography, videography, visual things. But beyond that, like, beautiful creative aspect, there are a lot of things and like logistics to think about, especially when it comes to wedding photography. And I know we've gotten some questions about this, so we're excited to dive into that. But really, like, where do you start? How do you find that perfect fit between a couple and a photographer? And I especially think about that seeing sometimes on social media when things are not a perfect fit. So, Jenny, I guess, is there anything you have to say about finding that right fit?
Yeah. So it's so funny. This is honestly one of my biggest things, and I think the first step is when you are looking for that photographer is to kind of start in even just planning through your wedding. What is your vibe? What are you looking for? What is your end game? So when you do look back on those photos, how do you want them to look? So it's not necessarily, gosh, like the details, yes, of your dress and stuff, but if you want to picture it hanging on your wall, do you want more of a posed look, which is totally cool, or are you looking for more of like that documentary look between you and your partner? So the biggest thing that I always do is I always suggest people to come with an idea of what it is that they want. And from there, you can really start to find your photographer, like if you are that perfect fit of their style that they currently have. So, great places to start. Here comes the guide. We always post beautiful photos, and then we always try and tag back to those photographers so that you will know where they're coming from. Another one of my favorite on social media is Anti Bride. They do a great job with tagging their photographers. That's also just a style in and of itself. So, to find that creative juice to get that vibe going, Vogue weddings, all of those areas where people really kind of focus on like building the wedding. And I think from there you can really start to find what that look is going to be. And then I also highly, highly suggest, aside from just liking their images, you have to make sure that you vibe with that photographer and not be scared to ask them questions, how they would handle potential situations during a wedding. So those are the biggest things that I always say is like, first start with that base. That's your building block. Like, what is my wedding going to look like? And then from there, all photographers start to have different styles and you can go from it from that point. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Okay.
I really like that
Yeah.
point that you made too about like, I think it makes a lot of, you're spending so much time with a photographer on the day of your wedding. They are going to be there for like really intimate moments. And so you want to make sure that that person like can vibe with you and can get, yeah, not just from the photography standpoint, but I think personality wise, I think that's a good
No,
point.
that is my biggest thing. You'll probably hear me say it like a million times is that if you think about it, you have it's your entourage of life with you around you for this big day. So if you invite someone in who's going to be capturing this and creating this and they don't vibe with you and they don't understand who you are and who your people are and they're, I don't know, like just standing there, they're not going to be able to capture those parts of you that are so important. So that I can't express it enough. Like you're pretty much finding a friend for the day that's going to come in and like mold with your people. So you got to like your photographer.
So, photography possibilities can go far beyond just the wedding day. And one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about is the engagement session. So, I'd love to know your thoughts on engagement sessions. What can couples expect for that? And do you recommend having it with the same photographer if possible? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Here's my thoughts. I am a huge proponent of engagement sessions. It sets the stage for your photographer to get to know you. It's a time for bonding. It's a time for them to understand not only how you and your partner look behind the camera, but it also allows them, I mean, honestly, the amount of people that shoot digital, so it will already give them a sense of how to work with you and your images post the wedding. So editing wise, like they'll already have an understanding of skin tone and all those different things, which come into a huge play as far as like, getting all of your colors right when you go into editing. If you already have like a base of, like, oh, this is pretty much going to work for them, that is huge. The other thing is that it's a time for you to really build a rapport with them. So when they arrive on your wedding day, you're not introducing yourself to them for the first time or really getting to know them. I've done both. Personal, like I have showed up and people have been like, oh, I already had my engagement photos done. It's like, great, awesome. And I show up on the day of the wedding and I'm meeting the bride or the groom for the first time, which for me, it's awkward. I'm not gonna lie. It's like, oh, hey, I'm here to document your most important day. We haven't met. Like, hi. Like, it's a lot.
I love hearing your perspective on that. And I've always thought it'd be, great to have the same photographer for your engagement photos and your wedding photos, mainly for the reason that I'm like, oh, that'll have the same style. All your photos will match. But all of those things that you mentioned, I think are far more important than that. I never would have even thought about like the skin tone stuff that you said, like them having a great idea of like a base of where to start the editing process. So yeah, that's a really great perspective.
I mean, it's really huge. I can't tell you how many times, like even like little tiny like inside jokes that you'll end up making while you're shooting, that type of thing, so that when you do show up on that day, I mean, and I'll go into this later, but as far as like when I am shooting, like when I'm doing an engagement session, I'll always end it with a question of like, okay, like I want you to remember this, think of this question, and then that question we come back on the wedding day and we answer it. So it's like from that point to that point. So it's an extension of the wedding. I always think like it's just that first step. So I really would not, I wouldn't skip it. Don't skip it.
Yeah, I love that. And it really will likely set the couple up for being really comfortable and at ease right away with the photographer on their wedding day, which would just
100%.
make for better photos. Yes. Another question I had for you has to do with a shot list. So I know a lot of photographers, or maybe not a lot of photographers, I've heard of people maybe going on Pinterest and pinning photos that they like or creating a shot list with special requests and must-have photos. Is this something that's helpful to you or that you ask your couples to provide?
It's interesting. I feel like it kind of goes back to, knowing the style of your photographer. I did have one client that was like, oh, I really wanted this. And it's like, well, I don't shoot that style. Like, it's kind of like, why'd you pick me? So yes, it can be helpful. I always preface like, look, I didn't shoot this, so you need to understand that this is somebody's completely different art. I can get close and we can get there. So those are always good. I always look at it as like if you go in to get your hair done by a hairdresser, like just because you like how someone's hair looks on someone else doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look that way on you. So grain of salt if you do end up, sending or, pinning stuff. The one thing that I really would suggest as far as like building out a shot list is I, as a photographer, I always send over a very detailed questionnaire a month before the wedding. And then I require it to be filled out a week before their wedding. And at that point, I always ask, like, are there special dynamics for people coming to your wedding? Mom and dad or aunts and uncles or anything like that that I would need to look out for. People you don't want together in a photo. So, like, Uncle Chris can't be with, Aunt Susie, stuff like that. So, and then this is the other thing as far as like building out a shot list, always carve out time and make time for couple photos. After the wedding, I can't stress it enough. If it's either during cocktail hour or during dinner, take that time, let your planner know in advance. Don't tell them during the wedding or during dinner, like, hey, we're going to run away with the photographer. They need to know that it's going to happen. And just take that time. That is one of my biggest tips. The edge of the wedding is off. You're excited, and it leads to the most beautiful images. So that's my spiel on that as far as building something out.
Yeah, that's really great. And I love that you say like that goes along with those first things that we talked about picking your photographer. You can't pick a certain photographer that has a certain style and expect them to do maybe the exact opposite of that. It's just not going to happen. And even if they try, it's probably not going to end up being that way. So of course you want to pick a photographer because you like the work that they do. But I love that you touched on carving out that special time for couple photos. Do you have any other thoughts for logistics of the wedding day? Caroline and I talk a lot about planning and timelines and all of that stuff. So aside from maybe those couple photos, you know, right after the wedding or during cocktail hour possibly, are there any other logistics for the wedding day that you swear by?
100%. So the other thing that I always, and I mean, it's different for different people. Some people will be absolutely not. Before I try to get, and this is, if they don't mind seeing each other before the wedding, I always try and clear out extended family portraits and all of that before the wedding. After the wedding generally tends to be a hot mess. It always is. Everyone's excited. Bridal party tries to sneak off to the bar. There's always someone that's like, maybe they've had too many already, and it turns into a mess. Or, because all the guests are there, so then it's like, oh, I haven't seen them in forever, and then that person's off. So I always try to tell them, if you can get your family there, and even if you don't want to see each other, just do just the bride's family first, and just, or whatever. Just try and get that out of the way before the wedding starts. I feel like it ends up being one of the biggest headaches. The other thing, so when I do send over that detailed questionnaire, it pretty much, based on the questions that I ask, it pretty much helps me build a timeline. I will submit that back to them and let them know, look, this is the best timeline that I think that you're going to be able to achieve based on whether or not you're doing a first look, but based on, your cocktail hour or how long your wedding's going to run and all that. I will give that to them. I'll request the information for the planner. If there is one, I'll give that to the planner, and then I'll say, I'll mark my things. Like, these are the areas that we have to fit in based on the planner in, where I would be in the timeline. So fitting in those little tiny things, so like family photos or stuff like that. So
Yeah, that's really great. And I know weddings and, any kind of big celebration like that, the time can really just start slipping away like quicker and quicker, especially if, there is an open bar. So having those things like laid out in a nice timeline is essential, I think.
And then I always let them know. So I'll always ask for a point person as well. So whoever that is, I always tell them, like, this person needs to know who everyone is that's on this list. I'll always have, I always request a family list of friends and family that you want to make sure that you're getting, I want mom, dad, cousin, aunt. So anyways, so then I'll have them, I make sure that they put the names in there. So then I'll always ask for a point person so that when those photos are being taken, it is like rapid fire. Like, look, you have to be in line. You have to be getting ready to go type thing. So
yeah, and I feel like that kind of leads into the next set of questions that I have, really like on the wedding day. So you are taking these photos. You've already talked about that timeline and kind of how some of these things kind of get worked in. But I guess it depends, I'm sure, on your style. Like, I guess that's my first question. Would you describe your style as more of that, like, you're capturing candid moments, maybe things that are more editorial, or I don't know, how would you describe your style?
my style is very much documentary, which when I started doing this, I was like, oh, this really sucks. Like, I don't want to take family portraits, I don't want to do that staged. So, but I had to hold back. I had to pull back and be like, okay, look, like a grandma or an aunt, like they want those. Like it's very traditional. It's very old school, but at the same time, like, you want that. So I had to change my thinking in that like, look, those have to be done, and they don't have to take a long time. They can be fast. However, I always make sure that my couples know, like, beyond, like, I will obviously take those traditional portraits, but other than that, I'm very, very pretty much all documentary. So I let them know, like, posing is very minimal as far as just like, to get the right light. Other than that, you're communicating, and so it's just, if that makes sense.
For sure, yeah. And I think that's one thing that I've always been interested in, because the staged photos, I think you're right. Like, sometimes they are just necessary to get quickly get the family into a picture, capture that moment, and yeah, try to make it as smooth as possible. But then I guess, and when we're thinking about the couple, if they are not people who are very used to being photographed, and they still want to capture that, like maybe your documentary style, but maybe don't feel as comfortable in front of the camera, what are some ways, like especially on a high stress day, like to make them feel at ease and get ready for some of those photos?
So my favorite thing, my husband bought it for me. He's also a photographer. It's called Super Feel for photographers. It's called Super Feel. It They created these little tiny books, and I think you get like a pack of 5, I think. And what it does is it's prompts. It's little tiny prompts, but they're little pocketbooks, and then there's spaces in the back where you can write, more in if you need to, or which I have over the years. And it's honestly, if anything, it was just kind of like a starting point for me to where it was they were teaching me how to interact with these couples in that way. So it's little questions like, you get your lighting perfect and you have them stand there and it's asking them a question like, okay, look in each other's eyes. Like, I want you to tell the other person where you see yourselves 5, 10, 15 years from now. And then you just stand and you photograph them. And especially on a day like that, like they're thinking about the future, they're thinking about what just happened, like emotions are just going to flow. So, and then there's also ones, where it's like, or, like if you're looking for like a detailed hand shot or something sweet and special that way, you can have them hold their hand and like with the other person's finger, like write an I love you message with your finger, and then you can capture that. And it's just little things like that of getting them to interact. And then they can start to lose that vision of where the camera is and what you're doing. It's really pulling them into each other and taking out the outside world around them. So
I love that. Oh, I like that thought process a lot, and making it so much, yeah, again, less posed, less staged, and really bringing it back to the heart of what the wedding day should be about anyways, right? Like their love story and letting them feel like so comfortable in that. Do you use similar prompts for like any of the wedding party photos, or is that primarily for couples?
100%.
Okay.
You can, there's always, in those books, there's different versions. So it's like, like interacting with the bridal party, it would be, one of our favorites to do is like, you put the bride and groom in the middle, and then they have to kiss until, everyone stops clapping. Or telephone is always hilarious as far as like, starting with something and going down the line. It's just little things like that. Like, can someone tell the most embarrassing story of, someone standing here? Because it's always usually the closest friends. So it's really just pulling them in and getting everybody to communicate as a group. And I don't know. I think it's so fun to watch because they just end up getting silly, and they really try and just tease on the couple and stuff like that. So
Oh, I love that.
yeah.
Okay, so after the wedding, I know a lot of couples get really antsy to have their photos back, but only one part of wedding photography is actually taking the photos on the wedding day. So I know there's a lot that goes into the editing process, and that's what kind of leads to the turnaround time. So I'd love if you can talk a bit on the editing process, what kind of goes into it, and why there is, that gap in between your wedding day and when you actually get the photos.
Yeah. So the first thing I would always tell, if someone was, having a wedding, I would always tell them to tell your photographer, and don't be afraid to ask. Just say, hey, like before you sign your contract, if it's not in the contract, is there any way that I can get maybe like 10 images before the full delivery? Just because that's something that, you would want to share. I always do it. I always try and turn around within the next day or 2 days after, depending if I've traveled, to where it's always like, hey, here's like 10 images of like, obviously it would be like, I always try and do a ceremony shot. I always try and do, if there's like a really cool exit shot, just kind of build it out as like a little miniature story in my mind of like, here was your day. You can share this on social media, give it to grandma and grandpa. Like, they're excited, and I get it. And so I always try and pull that out. Don't be afraid to ask your photographer if that's something they would be willing to do. And if they're not, and they're obviously not listening to what you want, maybe they're not the photographer for you, don't sign the contract. I always give a 6-week turnaround for images because of digital photography. Without fail, it's always well over 1,000 images that are shot on the day. It's a full 8-hour day. There's a lot going on. So culling through them it's not easy. So what I always do is I cull through them first. So go through and start building it out. What's the best of this? What's the best of this? What's the best of this? And then from there, it's just, I go to work and I start editing. I usually do it in chunks. Like I'll tell myself, okay, like today I'm going to get through the ceremony, or today I'm going to get through portraits. Today I'm going to get through this. And then once I have those chunks edited, I'll go through and see how they flow together. So making sure that the colors are right, making sure that, all of the sky as far as like editing matches in portraits and little things like that, just because I get picky to where it's like, I don't want, the sky to look one way in one image and one way in another. I always keep my edits the same. I don't change up colors. So it's going through and finding that uniformity. And then I can't stress this enough because it drives me nuts when people don't do it. When you deliver those images, I always think it's best for the couple if they have in the gallery the images spread into folders. So it would be like, I always do a detail folder. I always do a getting ready folder. I always do a portrait folder, a couple folder, a ceremony folder, and a reception folder. Just so that when they go back, it's not this like vomit of images and they're like, oh my gosh, there's 500 images here, so that they can go back and break it up. If they're like, oh, I remember there was like this reception shot, like, is it in there? They can go and find that easily. So that's why it takes so long. And it's personally my favorite part. I love editing. I know a lot of photographers don't enjoy it, but I feel like it really just kind of puts the bow on everything. And it's the second part of the creative process. So it is a beast, but also, it's fun. But don't be afraid to ask for those sneak peeks.
I love that you automatically send those sneak peeks, because I know, people get antsy, and it's not always that they're like rude about it, like, you better give me my photos, but they're just really excited to see, and 100%. They just had this really great experience. So that's just like a really great thing that you include for your couples. So I know that everything is really digital now, but do you still suggest ordering wedding albums, and what are your thoughts on those?
I do. There's been so many times that I've had brides from like 2 years past that are like, so I archive wedding galleries after a year. So you have 366 days from the time that I deliver, it gets archived. If you want it open, it's a $50 archival. I'll open it up for 30 days, close it out. Download your photos, make a book. I highly suggest it. There's so many. I mean, I've been married for 20 years now. There was nothing like that when I got married. There are so many wonderful companies out there that build the most beautiful books. My personal favorite is Artifact Uprising. But I mean, do it. It's so worth it to actually have the prints. I think just in general in life, we have so many prints of our daughters growing up. I mean, we have hundreds of photos that we've printed. And to tangibly hold something and look at it and feel it there's nothing like it. So print your photos, frame them, put them in a book. You won't regret it. It needs to be done.
I have to say, I'm also a huge fan of Artifact Uprising. That's where our wedding book is from. And there's just something that, like, I don't know, so sweet thinking that, oh my gosh, my kids someday get to flip through that book. and get to
Yes.
see those wedding photos. And that to me, I'm also like, oh, I can't wait to share that with them in that physical way. So I'm also a huge fan of the wedding albums.
100%. I mean, I remember like being a kid, and my mom always had so many photo albums, but like just sitting down in the living room and looking at photo albums, like no one wants to look at digital. Like just there's something so real about it that's just, I don't know. I don't know. I love it. Print them all.
Okay, Jenny. So we do have to ask. We talk about budgeting a lot over here, and it's so important. So we would love to hear your thoughts on, budgeting expectations with photographers.
Budgeting. Don't skimp out on photography is my biggest thing. I had a friend shoot my wedding. She was a photographer. She was a professional photographer. I also got married 20 years ago, and there was not really the digital revolution too much yet. But we don't have one framed photo in our home of our wedding. And it still pains me to this day that we don't. All of our photos were done on film. A lot of them were underexposed. It's just, if I could go back and do one thing for my wedding, I would have definitely put more money into a photographer and not worried about hurting someone's feelings on whether or not they should shoot my wedding. The cost of photographers, obviously, it varies. It varies where you live. It varies what you're looking for. It varies about how long you're going to be shooting for. If you're having a full wedding, like morning to night wedding, hire for 8 hours. Do it. It's worth it. And I honestly, unless you're really dreaming of a great exit shot, I would highly suggest having that photographer there for the first hour of the reception and then sending them on their way. Dancing photos are usually a hot mess, in my opinion. They're horrible to edit, in my opinion. And you can usually get what you need to get within the first hour of dancing. So with that said, it's so hard to say what to budget, but I think anywhere between, am I giving a number? Do you guys want a number?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I would say, depending on where you are, anywhere between 3 to 8 is where you should probably be sitting. And as wonderful as it is to have somebody be like, oh, like, I really want to get into wedding photography. I'd love to shoot your wedding. I'll do it for $1,000. Just say, hey, that's so sweet of you, but, I think we're going to have to go with someone else. And if you can't tell your friend, contact me and I will tell your friend for you. So it's just plan on budgeting a good amount of your budget, I feel like, should be placed towards wedding photography. It's the one thing that you're going to have left to remember of that day. And I just don't know why you wouldn't. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the people listening to this episode care a lot about photography, enough to have listened to this episode. So I think that's really great advice. It's really easy when you're not immersed in the industry or don't know anything about photography in general. You might say like, hey, they're a professional photographer. Like, of course they know what they're doing. Of course I'll get what I want. It's just not the case. So
No.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I don't think I've said this, but I can't stress enough is to ask to see multiple full deliveries of weddings. Any photographer could shoot one amazing image out of a wedding and the rest could maybe they don't know how to shoot a reception. Maybe they have no clue how to shoot a ceremony. Ask to see a full delivery. It's good, bad, and ugly. Like, you're going to see it all. And so I think a lot of times we get fixed on like, oh, but that first kiss shot was so great, or something like that. And being able to maneuver through a ceremony and being able to maneuver through a reception and hold I'm going to be honest, photographers pretty much end up holding this glue of the wedding party to make sure that everything is, the wedding planner does too, but a lot of it ends up falling on the photographer to make sure that everything is going along the way that it should go. and they're documenting at the same time. So take that time to look and make sure that they're actually capturing this the way that they're going to. So ask to see multiple weddings that they've shot, full deliveries. And if they're like, oh, I don't usually do that, just say, okay, thank you. Like, and I would go to someone who can. So.
And that kind of leads me to some of my last kind of questions that we have. We wanted to get some pro tips from you, but especially I think let's talk about photography, maybe like mistakes or things that like could become roadblocks and how to avoid them. And the reason I'm asking again and you can reiterate something you've already said, but the reason I'm thinking about this is I've seen all over TikTok this large debate between a bride and their photographer, and how the bride didn't get what she wanted. The photographer was very clear about the style, and it just felt like so many communication pieces were missing, and it was just sad for both people. It was sad on all accounts that like what happened ended up taking place. But are there any things you think that either couples or photographers can do to avoid something like that?
The one thing that I always do, and I think I did mention this, but I'm going to say it again, is if there are certain shots that you're looking for, like, hey, I really want that first cake, whatever cutting shot is super important to me. You need to let your photographer know. Like, they're not going to know. Or, I really want our first look, and I really want one of me tapping, their shoulder. So it's that kind of thing where it's like, if your photographer knows, like, oh, they really want an image like that, like, be as detailed as possible. And to photographers, ask for it. Like, I always ask them, are there any shots that you want to make sure that you have? If it's, anything, your mom buttoning your dress, or, I had one bride whose father had passed away and they had stitched something into her dress, like on the inside of her dress. And I said, when I asked, like, is there anything? They said, yes, we need to have an image of this. So it's making sure that you are understanding what they're looking for. I mean, ultimately, you're working for them that day. So you're capturing everything that they want to remember and how special that is for them. So take the time to talk to them and figure that out. And on the other hand, the couple needs to make sure that they're honest and that they're really thinking about it and communicating that out as well. Because, like I always say, like, I can't read your mind, so don't be afraid to tell me, the shots that you really want to get. So
yeah. And you've heard Chelsea and I say this before, the communication aspect is important for each and every vendor, for your bridal party, for your family, like every aspect of it. So I think that communication part is really important for everything, but again, for photographers as well.
100%.
And then the last thing that I would love to hear from you as a pro tip, you've probably seen many weddings, you've probably seen many things happen, and this doesn't have to be photography related, but what is a pro tip from you or some sort of advice that you can give to couples for their wedding day?
Oh, I know. I've shot so many couples that end up almost being embarrassed around each other, to where it's like, it's okay. Like, you can love on them, you can kiss them, you can hug them, you can be with them. And I think that's my biggest thing when I'm shooting anyone, is that I always say, like, always make sure that you're touching that person. If it's a family shoot, if it's, a wedding or anything like that, just always having that touch. It not only brings that connection, but it keeps that person grounded. It's that sense of feeling safe. It's that sense of feeling, you're not alone in this. We're doing this together. And it builds that safeness and that connection. Don't be afraid to kiss. Like, there's been couples that we've shot where it's like, oh no, like, it's okay. Like, you love this person. So that's my biggest thing, I think, is not worrying that the photographer is going to judge you or, anything like that. So just be okay to be yourself and have fun and let go, because it always comes out better in the images if you're just comfortable.
I love that. This is such a good episode, and I think there are so many takeaways that we have from this. The communication aspect, finding that perfect fit. Of course, there are all the logistics we talked over too, timeline, budget, and what have you. But in case anyone missed any of those things, make sure you refer back to the show notes because there are so many things that I think are so important when thinking about the photography aspect. So thank you so much, Jenny, for giving us all of that amazing information.
Thank you, guys. I'm so excited to hear it. And I don't know. I'm just happy that you guys are doing this. I feel like it was definitely needed, just in general. So you guys are the best.
Yeah, Jenny, we're so excited that we got to have you on the podcast. Like I said, we got to work with Jenny for our brand photos, and it was so much fun. She did such a great job, and she did a great job making us feel comfortable in front of the camera. I know Caroline's a little bit more of a natural, but I clam up a little bit. So yeah, she's so great. And thank you, everyone who listened. If you guys have any questions, photography related or just wedding related in general, please let us know. You can reach out to us through our website, theguidegalspodcast.com. On here, you can also find our full episode library and lots of free planning resources. You can also find us on Instagram at The Guide Gals Podcast. We're on TikTok at The Guide Gals Pod, and you can watch us on YouTube on the Here Comes the Guide YouTube channel. But like we said, Jenny, thank you so much for being here with us. This was such a fun episode, and it was really needed. We're so glad we could talk more about photography.
Yes.
Thanks, girls.
Thanks. Well, until the next episode then, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.